When you take up Australian citizenship, you immediately owe so many $1,000. Paid foreign debt. You become a Singapore citizen, you automatically have acquired so many dollars in assets. The Australian government owes 117 billion US dollars in external debt. I read that the debt is as large as Brazil, and Brazil has 120 million people, and Australia has 17 million people.
Lee Kuan Yew never held back when talking about Australia. And when the man who transformed Singapore into a high-income powerhouse had something to say, Australia listened. Under his leadership, Singapore's living standards eventually overtook both Australia and New Zealand. So when Lee Kuan Yew delivered his famous barb, warning Australia was on track to become the poor white trash of Asia, it struck a nerve. Not long after, the Hawke government unleashed sweeping economic reforms. They floated the dollar, deregulated the financial sector, and dismantled old tariff protections, turning Australia outward, exactly what Yew had argued was needed. But his criticism didn't stop there. Through the 1990s and early 2000s, Lee Kuan Yew repeatedly questioned Australia's competitiveness, warning that rich natural resources had made the country complacent. He contrasted Australia's high consumption and rising debt with Asia's high-saving, hard-driving economies. And he was openly sceptical of Western social benefits, arguing they inflated public debt and encouraged over-promising at election time.
Every election, they promise the voter everything that he would like. Free health, unemployment benefits, pensions. Who pays? They never raise taxes. They say, this amortized over so many years, which means some future government must raise that money. Right? Net result is you have mortgaged your future.
Economist Shane Oliver says Lee Kuan Yew was prone to exaggeration, but he wasn't entirely wrong. He points out that Australia has historically coasted on its natural wealth, and Aussies have been debating it since the 1960s.
Lee Kuan Yew's comments at the time weren't that unusual. I mean, you could argue there's an element of that in the Lucky Country book, that Australia is blessed with natural resources so we can just sort of coast along and don't have to worry too much. But I think Australian policymakers realised that that wasn't good enough. And we did see, at least starting in the 80s, but continuing in the 90s, going into the 2000s, and then we started to see the fruit from that. The governments of both political persuasion, Labor initially, then the coalition, sought to deregulate the economy and open it up. And I think we've actually done pretty well in Australia.
But Oliver says Australia ultimately adjusted, unlike resource-rich Argentina, for example, which slid down the global rankings. Australia diversified. The economy is now 80% services, with mining just 10% of GDP. Some of Lee Kuan Yew's views on welfare also reflected cultural differences. Asian societies rely more on family support, while Western countries rely more on the state. Oliver says Lee Kuan Yew's criticisms of Medicare were unfair.
It's probably one of the good things about Australia that we have that health insurance net that covers all Australians, and I think it leads to longer life in Australia. In America, they spend more on health per capita, but they live about 4 or 5 years shorter than we do on average. And the Medicare scheme, I think, is part of it, that it spreads the benefits around and covers all Australians. So I think Medicare is actually a good thing. And I think government in Australia has done well to cap its growth. It is very easy to let spending on health get out of control because new whiz-bang things and drugs come along, and so you think, we've got to have this, got to have that, and you can keep spending on all this stuff. But by and large, we've managed to control it, and it hasn't ballooned out.
The NDIS is projected to cost more than $52 billion next year, something Lee Kuan Yew would almost certainly have scoffed at. Even so, Australia's fiscal position isn't disastrous. Government debt is about 45% of GDP, far below other developed countries like the US, the UK, and Japan. But it's still higher than the 20% level seen in the 1970s, when Lee Kuan Yew made his famous white trash warning. Australia has largely avoided the pitfalls that Lee Kuan Yew once warned about, although he probably wouldn't have agreed with the path we've taken to to get there.
And even from my sick bed, even if you are going to lower me into the grave and I feel that something is going wrong, I'll get up.